Hey everybody, it's Coach Malcolm, and today the tactic that I'm going to be focusing on in this video is a piece trap. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going through some positions, trying to solve them ourselves, but also working through them, understanding why the pieces are trapped, why piece traps are so effective, and we're going to get a little more difficult, like most of my videos do, as we go along. But just to start off, a little introduction. Piece traps are pretty much exactly what they sound, right? A trap is where you have something and it's impossible for it to escape. So when we're talking about a piece trap, it's basically when we trap one of our opponent's pieces, we get it in a position where it has no good moves, no squares, where it is going to be safe, and in doing that, we are able to win material. So if that's still a little bit confusing, don't worry. Take a look at this chessboard we've got right in front of us and see if you can find how we can trap this bishop right here on b6, make it so that he has absolutely no good moves whatsoever, and we will be able to win him for less than we take him for. So take a second or two. Again, like I always say, pause your videos if you need to. All right. Hopefully we see pawn to c5, right? This maybe has happened in some of your games before. Maybe you've done it to some of your opponents, but here, obviously this pawn is supported by this key pawn on b4 guarding c5, and it is attacking this bishop on b6. This bishop on b6 has no good squares. It obviously can't go to c7 or a7 because, its own pieces are in the way. If it decided to take on bishop takes c5, fine by us. We'll take a piece for a pawn any day of the week. And if this bishop tries his only other square, bishop to a5, we can simply just take that as well. And again, knight takes a5. We'll just be getting a pawn for a piece here. And that works out for us. So this is just a very simple, most basic level. You've got a strong pawn structure. You're attacking a piece, and he has absolutely no squares to go to, unfortunately for them. All right, let's go on to our next piece trap. This is very common. This is a trick that you guys might end up using in your game sometimes. So how can white, again, trap this bishop? Obviously, it's not on b6 anymore, but how can we trap this black bishop on h2? All right, hopefully we see pawn g3, right? This bishop suddenly, he goes all the way from having a beautiful open diagonal straight to, oh my god, I'm about to be taken. The bishop can't go to g1. We're just simply going to take it. If this bishop decides, maybe it's a better idea for me to take on g3, again, we're just going to take that bishop back. And regardless of what black does, maybe, he says, oh, it's the end game. I'll bring my king in. We're going to play king g2, attacking that bishop, and that bishop is going to be off the board real soon. So a lot of times this can happen. Let me just play a few moves. It can happen like this as well, where someone sees a queenside castle and they see with their bishop, oh, free pawn takes a7. But here black could do the same trick, pawn b6, and this king is soon going to come over to b7 and win a bishop. All right, let's go to our next puzzle here. We're playing with the black pieces. Obviously, see if you can figure out which piece we're trapping and how we are going to effectively trap that piece. All right, hopefully we see black to move, pawn c4. That pawn is obviously supported by the pawn on d5. And unfortunately for white, this bishop on d3 has no squares. It can't go to e2 or c2 because of its own pieces. And every one of these squares that it has is guarded by this very powerful black pawn structure. And then, white could choose to take and get 2 pawns for a piece, but we are still, as black, much better in this position. All right, next up, we're not trapping a bishop this time. We are trapping a rook. So white to move now. See if you can trap one of those rooks either on c8 or d8 with one move. All right, hopefully we see this rook right here in particular is in an awkward position. It doesn't even have any moves to start off with. So all we need to do is attack it with our bishop. Bishop a6 attacks that rook. He is trapped in by his own pieces. He's got no squares. Black definitely would not play a move like queen b7. Maybe they would play something like rook e8, in which case we're just going to take And you know, if we want to take here as well, here after rook e1, white is up an exchange and a pawn. All right, continuing on. We have another trap in this position. See again if you can figure out what piece and how we can trap it. So the key to, you know, if you haven't caught on yet, the key to these, you know, the key to finding traps in chess games is looking for pieces that are easily attacked, sometimes pieces that are hanging, but not always, and keeping in mind what squares around these pieces are already controlled and covered by your pieces. Because the whole point of a trap is covering almost always, you know, the last puzzle, the rook was trapped in by his own pieces, but the traps are almost always about, you know, being able to cover the squares that your opponent has for a given piece. So take a second here, see if we can figure out how we can apply those ideas here. All right, the answer is bishop b7. This rook is pretty exposed, and our bishops do a really great job, you know, taking advantage of it. We're attacking the rook on a8. We're guarding its escape square c8, and this bishop on g3 is attacking b8 as well. So that rook has no real good moves. You know, maybe black would decide, well, they can't castle because of the computer, but maybe black would decide just to play a random move, in which case we're just going to take that rook and be happy with that. So next up, we've got, you know, this one's a little bit different, but the same idea, looking for which piece is vulnerable. In this case, which piece is hanging, and how we can make sure it has no squares whatsoever to escape to. All right, our vulnerable piece here is that rook on a4, kind of trapped on the a file, and after this move, king b3, he surprisingly has no moves. Can't go to a5 because of that pawn. Can't take on b4 because of the king, and any of these squares, a3 and a1 are both, you know, they're guarded by the rook and the king in some cases, but they're both guarded by the bishop, and b1 is, sorry, a2 is guarded by the king. So wherever that rook goes, he is going to be taken, and we'll have a pretty easy endgame on our hands, especially with this rook coming down to h7 inevitably, but that's a lesson for another day. All right, next up, we are trapping the queen, right? The most powerful piece on the board. How can we get it out of the way already in this middle game position? See if you can figure out how to attack that queen. You'll already notice she's a little cramped in. As we know, that is pretty classic for trapping positions, because when they're cramped in, they have already less squares that they're able to go to. So, hopefully you've gotten a chance to look. Our trap in this position is the super neat rook to b3. Obviously, the queen can't take on b3 because the a2 pawn and the c2 pawn support that rook. The queen can't go to b4 because of the rook. Can't go to c5 because of that bishop on e3. Let's see what else. Can't go to a4 because of both the knight and the bishop. And b2 and c1, she is going to run into some major problems with these two super strong rooks in this position. So there's our queen trap. Next up, see, this one's a little trickier. Like I said, they're getting a little bit harder, but see if you can find this piece trap. It's a pretty cool one as well, I think. All right, our piece trap here is with the pawn, right? So the weakest piece is now trapping the strongest piece, right? This queen cannot go to any squares on the 5th rank because just of the pure power of these pawns and all the squares that they have decided to cover. She can't take on e4 because that's supported by the bishop on g2. Can't go to d4 and give check. I mean, she can give check, but she'll be taken by the rook. Similarly, you know, c3 and b2 are both covered nicely by the knight on the case of c3 and the queen in the case of b2. So this queen is indeed, unfortunately for her, trapped. All right, here we've got our final position, and obviously when you're playing a chess game, you only get one move at a time, but just for training purposes, for practice, even if you just want to humor me, let's look for 4 different traps in this position, because there are indeed 4 trap pieces, not right now, but there are 4 pieces that black has that can be trapped 1 move each. So let's be on the lookout for those. Keep in mind we're looking for, stray pieces that aren't very well protected, pieces that already seem like they don't have a lot of squares to go to, and pieces that have squares that are already controlled. So you might be already getting an idea of what exactly I'm referring to. But let's take a look. 4 traps in this position. You might need to pause your video, try and spot all 4. All right. So hopefully you've gotten a chance to figure them out. Our first trap is very similar to the one that we started off with. Pawn to d5, attacking this bishop on e6, supported by the rook and the pawn on e4. And this bishop is trapped in, similarly to some of our other problems, by his own pieces. And every other square that he wants to go to is guarded by a white pawn. So that bishop has no moves, and he will be leaving the board quite shortly. Next up, our second trap is pawn g3. All right, this knight is one of those stranded pieces. You know what they say, knights on the rim are dim. This case really shows why it's dangerous to put your knight on the side of the board in many cases. The knight cannot go back to g6 because of the pawn. Can't go to f5 because of the pawn on e4. Can't go to f3 because of the knight. And cannot go to g2 because of the bishop. So that knight is actually trapped. All right, our third trap on the board is bishop h6. This rook, like another puzzle we saw, trapped in by its own pieces, nowhere to go, and white is really taking advantage of these dark squares. This is why your coaches will tell you all the time, don't move pawns in front of your king because it exposes weaknesses like this, and white has in this position taken advantage of that weakness and is going to win that rook. And our fourth and final peach trap in this position is the super sneaky queen b4. Another knight on the side of the board, pretty much stranded. Can't go to b1 or c2 because of that king. Can't go to c4 because of the bishop. And cannot go to b5 because we do indeed have 2 attackers, and this would end up turning into a skewer as well. But that's another lesson, another time. And this knight is trapped. I don't believe there's any way to save it. So that is the end of our traps video. Always be on the lookout for traps. And the important thing, a lot about these tactics videos that I'm making, that other coaches are making, tactics are important to play in your own games to win material, but they're also important to use to be thinking about your opponent's moves, right? If you see your opponent can deliver a trap, can trap one of your pieces, can fork one of your pieces, skewer one of your pieces, a whole range of different tactics. If you see your opponent can put you in discovered check, try and get out of it, right? Because tactics are about knowing how to gain material, but also knowing how to save your material so you can have more stable, better chess games that you're more likely to win. But thank you for coming to the traps video. I hope we learned something. I hope to see some traps in your guys' games as well. Bye, everybody.